Bom dia a todos, muito obrigada por estarem aqui desta forma tão matinal. Eu tenho o grande prazer hoje de estar a presidir esta mesa em nome do ISCTE-IUL, que é um dos parceiros do Clube de Lisboa, e de apresentar os nossos oradores. Como sabem, este painel é dedicado às questões da sustentabilidade, tem este belo nome de O Planeta, o nosso planeta. A nossa primeira oradora é bastante conhecida, Kitty van der Heijden, que é atualmente a diretora para a África e a Ásia do World Resource Institute. É formada em Economia pela Universidade Erasmus de Roterdão e foi embaixadora para o desenvolvimento sustentável e diretora do Departamento para o Clima, Energia, Ambiente e Água do Ministério dos Negócios Estrangeiros holandês. Trabalhou ainda nas Nações Unidas, em Hanoi, Vietnã. Atualmente trabalha entre a Holanda e a Etiópia, Addis Ababa, segundo diz a internet. O nosso segundo orador é o professor Vítor Alcobia, que é o diretor de projetos e engenheiro de petróleos e colabora atualmente com o Beicip-Franlab como consultor desde 2002, aqui segundo os apontamentos. Portanto, tem uma grande experiência em energia do petróleo, na avaliação de campos petrolíferos, de gás, desde o Mar do Norte a Angola, México, Rússia, Venezuela, Extremo Oriente e Médio Oriente. Portanto, estamos aqui nas mãos de um especialista em hidrocarbonetos. E de um segundo especialista em hidrocarbonetos, que é de mais conhecido aqui nesta casa, o diretor executivo da Partex, António Costa e Silva, que é presidente então da Comissão Executiva do Grupo Partex Oil and Gas e é professor do Instituto Superior Técnico na Universidade de Lisboa. Licenciado em Engenharia de Minas, é mestre em Engenharia dos Petróleos e doutorado pelo Instituto Superior Técnico e pelo Imperial College em Londres. Portanto, nós teremos primeiro a intervenção da Kitty van der Heijden, seguida de Vítor Alcobia, e depois teremos como discussant desta sessão o professor António Costa e Silva. Kitty, it is my pleasure to welcome you and the floor is yours.
See if we can make this work. I think the technology is trying to make it work, so if we have a second. My name is Kitty van der Heijden, as my colleague just said. Does anybody in this room know WRI before I begin? Okay, I have some mission work to do. We are certainly not where I would like it to be. WRI is an independent think tank working at the intersection of environment and development issues. We are 800 staff, 800 experts, and work across the globe with offices in China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, Turkey, Europe, Africa, trying to make change happen on these urgent issues, and some of them I'm going to be talking about today. I've been asked to talk about energy transition in particular, because that will determine whether we will be able to keep catastrophic climate change away. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm Dutch, and we have a reputation for being honest to the point of being rude. So let me begin with the conclusion. And the conclusion is that science knows that we are not making change fast enough. We are ruining the planet not just now, but for the next generations and for poor and vulnerable people across this world. But it is policymakers, private sector, and us as individual consumers that are still not doing enough. In my lifetime, and I probably look aged beyond my years by working on these issues, emissions have risen sixfold, and they show, unfortunately, no signs of abating. After a few years of being flat, hoping that we were decarbonizing our economy, last year the increase in carbon emissions was 2%. We are now 145% above pre-industrial emission levels. That's how bad it is. Last year was the warmest non-El Niño year on record. The past 5 years have been the hottest ever on the planet. And this is what we're up against. We had 200 years to use half of the carbon budget, which is the emission levels to keep temperature rise below 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. And if we do not decarbonize our economy in the next 20 years, that's tomorrow, we will not be able to keep catastrophic climate change away. What that means is that in 2020, that's less than 1,000 days away, global emission levels will have to peak. And the energy sector is going to have to play a major role in that. We can, of course, I know that it won't be happening by 2020, but the longer we wait, the deeper the curve of emission decreases must be. This is not something that we can wish away. This is the reality. This is what science tells us. And science tells me that we are in a hurry or we will simply not be able to make it. So is demand for energy, which is one of the largest parts of global CO2 emissions, is that changing? Are we seeing that step change that we need to see? Well, let's have a look. Energy demand in Europe, it's down. Energy demand in the United States, in Japan. Oh, yes, we're going the right direction. Or perhaps not completely. Look at Latin America, Middle East, Southeast Asia, Africa, and, whoops, China. Uh-oh, India. Are we making it? Are we changing energy demand? Are we getting there in time? No, we're not. No, we're not. And that has a reason, because while we may be safe and secure in our energy supplies, people in countries where I live and work, like Ethiopia, are still a long way away from we are. More than 1 billion people in developing countries have no access to energy. Most of them live in Africa and Southeast Asia. And if we continue the way we are, we will still have 675 million people without access to energy. That is what we promised in the Sustainable Development Goals as a world community. So the fact that demand is rising is a good thing for the SDG, and it's a bad thing for emissions. So you'll feel that I have this incredible sense of urgency. We are losing time. It's slipping through my fingers like oil. And still I'm optimistic. And I'll give you 6 reasons why I believe we are still making the change happen. We may not be going fast enough, but the writing is on the wall. First of all, coal. You all know that coal is the most carbon-intensive source of energy, and coal is actually dropping. It dropped 2% in 2016. Compared to 2014, it's a more than 4% decrease in demand. So we are going the right direction. But like I said, it's just not fast enough. Every major country is reducing coal demand, but it's all going by 1%. It's single-digit change. Every major economy in the world is reducing coal dependency, except India. So change is happening. And even China, the largest coal consumer by far, has now reduced coal for the 3rd year in a row. And no matter what this guy says, we are in the era of peak coal. Coal has peaked. It is going out of fashion. It is going out of economics simply because we have better, cheaper options than coal. The train has left the station. Renewables are here, and they will stay. Good news number 2 is not just that coal is going out, but renewable energy is going up. Investment in renewable energy has doubled compared to fossil fuel investments. And that not just last year, no, that's for 5 years in a row that we invest double in renewables compared to what we invest in fossil fuels as a world community. And why is that? Well, it's not because people love the birds and the bees and they want to stabilize the climate and all of that. That may be great. But they're doing that because of these graphs. They may be hard to see in the back. But this is levelized cost of energy, so total cost of energy for wind, and this is for solar. This is the year of Copenhagen, the year that didn't deliver the hope that we had. From Copenhagen to now, prices of solar PV panels have come down 86%. Solar PV and wind PV are simply becoming cheaper, cost competitive with any other energy source. And that's why even an agency like the International Energy Agency, one of the more conservative, I would say, think tanks on energy, has had to consistently, over the years, revise upwards where we will end up with renewable energy. They had to revise upwards 5-fold since 2000 projections on wind energy, and no less than 14-fold projections on solar PV installations. So we are getting there. And even Greenpeace, which everybody thought in Copenhagen was a rogue, woolly socks brigade, activist NGO, even they got it wrong. They underestimate just how fast renewable energy deployment is going. And make no mistake about it, it is not because people want to stabilize the climate. It is because it is becoming cost competitive. By 2025, 2030, renewables, and particularly solar, will simply be cheaper than coal. It makes good economic sense to make that change happen. Do we see it happening? Do we see it happening? Well, let's see. We have about 1,000 gigawatt of renewable energy at present in the world. Where is that? It's not where we live, guys. We are still the dirty guys. It's in China where we see massive deployment in renewable energy. That's where the new green economy is being established. That's where innovation is happening, where patents are growing, where employment is growing. This is the United States, Germany, Japan, India, and Italy. We are getting there, but we are not getting there fast enough. But even in Europe, where we are slow because we have an established grid infrastructure, look at what's happening in the United Kingdom. I hope you can hear me. This is 2012. 42% of electricity is in coal. This is 5 years later. 2017. 7% of electricity is coal. If that is not a revolution in the making, in just 5 years' time, I don't know what it is. This is shifting the balance towards renewables. And the same goes for renewable deployment, from 10% to 23% in 5 years' time. And that's not going to stop, because the UK, together with others, have started this Powering Beyond Coal Alliance. They want to get out of coal by 2025. This equation is not going to stop. The train has left the station. And while at present in the world we may have only 5% of renewable energy, by 2040 the expectation is that that would be well over a third. Good news number 3. If you don't care about climate and you don't care about innovation and growing your economy in a sustainable way, well, maybe you care about employment. Clean energy is simply a very good employment sector. Solar and wind have doubled their employment since 2012, and in China, renewable energy employs 35% more people than gas and oil combined. So this is a very smart investment as a politician if you want to keep your economy growing. And while oil and gas are shedding employment, we currently have about 10 million people employed in renewable energy, and the expectation is that that will grow to 25 million in the next 10 years. I would think that that's a fairly good investment if you're a politician. Good news number 4. It's not just that we are changing the electricity. There's a revolution going on in the transport sector that is so oil dependent. They're going electric. And while we are starting from a very small base, look at what's happening. This is going very, very fast. It's happening not just because of climate change, but it's happening because the industry itself is seeing that there are chances in this new green automobile sector. Companies like General Motors have promised that by 2023 they will put out 20 new models that are electric. Volvo, by 2019, which is almost, all cars will be either hybrid or electric. This is an unstoppable revolution in the transport sector that will reduce dependency on oil and gas and fossil fuels. And it's not just the industry. Look at what's happening in countries. Norway, by 2025, only hybrid or electric cars are allowed on the road. The Netherlands, zero-emission cars by 2023, mandatory. It is happening, but it is not fast enough. There are still major governments in this world, like Germany, like China, like India, where we don't know where they're going. They've said that they want to get on this bandwagon, help on the change, get into that innovation. But someone like Merkel has still said, I don't know when I can promise that we do this. Good news number 5. This is a silent revolution that you won't read about in the paper. You will see electric vehicles. You will be able to purchase green power. But what you don't see is that carbon pricing has long gone global. We now have more than 40 national jurisdictions that have a sort of carbon pricing. We have 20 local jurisdictions, states, cities, regions, that have either emissions trading, cap and trade systems, or carbon pricing. This is happening, and carbon prices may not yet be where they are, but 7 of the 10 major economies of this world now have a form of carbon pricing. China has gone national with a carbon market. And no, we don't have the carbon price that we need to shift pollution to the companies, to make sure that they pay up for social and environmental externalities, but it is a revolution that is simply not going to stop. Another revolution that's happening is subsidies from the public sector. There have traditionally been, as you can see, massive subsidies to the fossil fuel industries. This is the comparative subsidies for renewable energies. In the years where we knew that climate change was happening and when we knew that we are almost losing the window to keep temperature rise below 2 degrees, fossil fuel subsidies went up. Isn't that weird? That's the way policies work. Now we are seeing a gradual decline, and we're seeing that renewable energy subsidies are going up. If we could bring this down to 0, we could reduce global emissions by 13%. Just imagine 13% less by stopping to subsidize the wrong thing. Can't we force our politicians to get that done, particularly in developing countries? Because that's where most of this is happening. In the past years, 50 countries have started to reform their fossil fuel subsidies. So again, it's an unstoppable train. It's happening across the globe, even if you don't hear about it. And so, while I started off with pessimism, I want you to understand that the renewable energy revolution, that transition, it's not just desirable, it is achievable, and beyond all, it is unstoppable. By 2040, the expectations is that we will have a 3/3 world, as they call it. When you look around, 1/3 of vehicles will be electric by 2040. 1/3 of power will be solar, wind, or other renewables, and we will have improved energy efficiency by 1/3. And even that is not going to get us where we need to be. So I want to highlight 4 accelerators that will drive this transition faster tomorrow than it did today. One is water. Why water? What does water have to do with energy? Well, the power sector is a very large consumer of a very scarce resource, which is called fresh water. 20% of global fresh water goes to the energy sector. Well, they're running into a major problem with that. This is India and China, maybe a bit hard to see from the back. Where you see blue dots, it is hydropower stations. Where you see sort of rusty brown dots, it's where you have thermal power plants. Yeah? In blue, areas where there's no water stress. In red and yellow, areas where water stress, in other words, where demand outstrips supply, is increasing. What does this tell you? Already 1 in 5 thermal power plants is facing stress because there isn't enough water to cool your plants. A country like India last year lost 13 terawatt hours of energy, not because there were major upheavals, no, because there wasn't enough water to cool their plants. That is as much as Sri Lanka needs to power the whole country for a year. So water is going to drive change whether we like it or not. This is the picture in 2025, same picture, same regions. Half of the power plants will not have enough water to run their plants. This is going to drive change irrespective of climate change. Water scarcity is real. Of the new power plants, the coal-fired power plants that China is planning, more than half has been planned in areas of extreme water stress. And we are now discussing with China, do you really think that this is a wise investment? Maybe you should change. Accelerator number 2 comes from you, from us, from the individual consumers, from citizens across this world. Air pollution. From diesel-driven trucks, from gasoline cars, from coal-fired plants. It is the 5th leading cause of death in India, and it is the single largest cause of social agitation across the world. China is not changing because they care about global climate stability. They're changing because they're fearing societal upheaval. They will be gone out of power. And in none of the cities in the world we are doing enough. Who knows who this guy is? Very often when I do these talks, I hear this is George Clooney. No, it's not George Clooney, though he's indeed a very good-looking man. This is actually Mark Carney. Mark Carney is the governor of the Bank of England, and he is also the chair of the financial sector reform in the G20. This guy represents the pinstripe suits, the power of this world. He is not the environmental activist brigade. No, he's power. And what does he say? That climate change is extremely dangerous. That climate change will undermine our growth, our investments, our lives, and our livelihoods. And if we do not change, we will simply go out of business. So, this guy, one of the most powerful pinstripe suits that you don't think will talk in activist language about climate change, set up a task force for financial disclosure. Are we sure we are investing our money where we get bang for our buck in the long run, or do we have a carbon bubble? This guy, you will probably know, this is Mike Bloomberg, very active on climate change, and he led this task force that is now leading to disclosure of your carbon risks in investment portfolios. Do you have stocks in fossil fuel companies? Are they investing in green infrastructure? Do you know where your money is being spent? Well, that is what this is about. Investors are already changing. They are seeing the writing on the wall. Shareholder resolutions are up. Exxon is now producing scenarios to be compatible with the 2-degree world. So can big oil survive? Well, it's questionable. It's questionable. When horse carriage-driven cars were faced with competitions from cars in the previous century, they said, well, we are a transport service company. We'll survive while the horse-drawn carriages are out of business. The energy sector is now saying, well, we are an energy service company. Well, unless you change your business model, you will be out of business. But it's happening. It's happening. Exxon agrees to disclose their climate risks in their portfolio. Can they keep the world below 2 degrees? Statoil is going to reduce emissions by 20%. A company like Shell has just published 2 weeks ago the Sky scenario. How can my business model contribute to a 2-degree world? And the largest sovereign wealth fund, the Norwegian pension fund, has now been told by the Norwegian central bank, again, this is not an activist environmental agency, by the Central Bank of Norway, divest from oil and gas because it is not a viable business proposition for the future. Insurers are changing the world. This is AXA, and they've said, we're going to quit insuring any project in oil sands and pipelines because these are stranded assets. We know that they will never yield the rate of return compatible with the 2-degree world. We're getting out. And then the last accelerator, and I'm going to end. Climate change has very often in our lifetimes been pursued as a moral imperative. We have to do this because of poverty, because it's good for the world, because of this or because of that. That has never convinced any politician or CEO to do the right thing. The only thing that will be convincing is if climate change is a threat to our economy. And ladies and gentlemen, the business is already getting this. If you look at investment rewards, they are simply stronger and better for those companies that disclose climate risks and that invest sustainably. This is an important picture. World Economic Forum in Davos, I'm sure you all know it. They ask every year to every big company in this world, if you think about risks that will undermine your business continuity, what is it that keeps you up awake at night? What will undermine your business? When will it go bankrupt? Well, in the next 18 months, they say everything you read in the newspaper nowadays, it's about migration, state collapse, conflict, unemployment, failure of governance, right? We read about these things every day. And then you ask the same question, and what will undermine your business 10 years from now? What is the single biggest threat to the continuity of your business? And ladies and gentlemen, that is everything I work on. Water scarcity, failure of climate change mitigation, so reducing emissions and adaptation, extreme weather events, that's clearly climate related, food crisis, that's clearly climate related, and as a result of that, profound social instability. If we do not address these issues as public and private sector, we will not achieve the SDGs and we will not stave off catastrophic climate change. And if you think that Paris is enough, and we're not even meeting Paris at the moment, I want you to understand that what Paris brings us is catastrophic climate change. It brings climate change between 2.7 and 3-point-something degrees. This is catastrophic climate change according to science. We need to do a whole lot more if we were to get to 1.5 degrees. I will skip this one. This is the revolution we need to see. We have very little time, but where we are now in power generation from renewables, 18%, it needs to be 85% in 30 years from now. From a quarter of power generation and final energy consumption, it needs to go to 2/3. And sometimes when I prepare these talks, I worry that I'm going to make you so depressed because this is a massive undertaking. It will impact your lives, your investment portfolio, and your children's lives. And when you are worried that this is too big for me, I can't deal with this, I'm only a humble individual, how am I going to contribute to this change? I want you to think of what you can do as an individual. I hope everybody now understands that we need to change. And I think if I do these talks and I ask, do you understand we need to change? 100% of people go up with their hand. But this has 2 letters in addition. And very few people think how they themselves can change. Whether you are a CEO or a private citizen, every single day you make choices in your life that contribute to a better world or continue with business as usual. The food that you buy, the energy you buy, your car that you drive, the politician you vote into office, all of that is part of a solution or remains part of the problem. I live in Africa, and in Africa they always say one thing: when you feel overwhelmed with the enormity of these challenges and you feel that as an individual you can't make change happen, they say, if you think you are too small to be noticed and to make change happen, go and sleep in a bedroom with a mosquito. I want you to be my mosquitoes. Thank you.
Thank you, Kitty, for this marvelous presentation and really challenging. And now I'll give the floor to Victor Alcobia.
Good morning. So I'm going to speak in English as well because it will make things easier. I hope that everyone here understands, and not being an Englishman, so it's easier to understand me. Before I start, I would like to say that my presentation goes in the same line as the Kitty one. Except that being an engineer, so I try to look at numbers. And this the second point is, I hope that my presentation is not too difficult for those who are not familiar with mathematics and equations, but I try to make it the simpler as possible, but if you have any questions afterwards, I will be glad to answer. So this is the subject of this conference of today. I have added actually one point which I'm not going to approach in my presentation. Maybe in the discussion we will have the time to do that, which is on the supply of energy. Of course, we all agree, and I want to be clear that we have to go to a decarbonated economy. But things don't happen from one day to another, and Kitty presented this transition, and we all agree the big question is how fast we can go in this transition. So I start with some basic information, maybe familiar for most of you, but not maybe for all. When there was this COP15 in Copenhagen, it has a goal was to reduce, to limit increase of temperature to 2 degrees C in 2050, and 2.5 degrees C in 2100. This was not a very successful agreement. Then there was the COP21, the Paris Agreement, which is much tougher, and people sometimes don't realize that. They want to limit the warming below 2 degrees C by 2100. This is much tougher than Copenhagen. And this is now what I would say the global community uses as a reference to follow, so, and we need to be clear. The other thing is, what is the current situation? You have here a graphic showing the emissions of carbon dioxide. It starts in 65, where we had around 10 gigatons. I apologize for the Anglo-Saxon people, they would say billion tons, but it's the same. Giga is international system of unities, and billion for the UK. But we are currently around 33.4. We just retain this number because it's here. And you can see, for example, the contribution of Asia Pacific, as Kitty rightly showed in his presentation, which contribute much to this increase. Also, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, in 2014, they calculated that the world has roughly emitted 2,000 gigatons of CO2 so far from the initial of the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago. And if you want to keep below 2 degrees C, we have these 3.7 or 3,700 gigatons of CO2, which should not go beyond that. And that's a challenge, because if you take 33 today, then it's not very many years, because you can't imagine that we go from CO2 emissions to zero emissions from one year to the other. So this is why everyone talks about this energy transition. Okay, this is the only equation I have here, but I think it's quite important. It's called the Kaya identity, on the name of Japanese. Actually, there was two Japanese gentlemen that proposed this identity. And what does it say? It says that we can estimate the emissions of CO2 by taking into account 4 factors. The first factor is called the carbon intensity. We all need energy. Energy does not happen in nature naturally, so we need to generate this electricity. So we can estimate how many tons of CO2 I send to the air to produce 1 megawatt hour. This is a simple number, because all of us receive an electricity bill which is in megawatts hour. So this is energy. Of course, Kitty said that, and I will say the same. You'll see that, for example, if I use coal to generate megawatts hour, I'm certainly much less environmental friendly than if I use renewables energy, which has no CO2 in it. So if you use renewables, this becomes a zero number. The second thing is also very important, is energy intensity. How many megawatts hour I need to produce 1 kilo euro of wealth in my economy. So this is related to the GDP. The third factor is the gross domestic product per capita. It's something everyone knows here in the room. And this GDP tends to grow. And it's probably not a very reasonable concept. I don't mention this here, but I don't think this GDP growth is a very sustainable concept. And the last one is human population. Of course, more we have people, more we need energy, so more we need to produce megawatts hour, and therefore more we can send CO2 in the atmosphere. So I will mention these 4 factors because to me, energy transition has to look to these 4 factors. And I will start with the 2 last ones. We are very simple ones. So in terms of growth, and everyone loves growth, every government these days wants at least a 3% growth per year, because 3% growth is very good. You have no deficit. All social security has enough money to pay to the elderly people, to pay for the hospitals and so on. So everyone wants a 3% growth. Oh, there are many estimates, but I took this one from BP that says the world will grow roughly around 3.25% per year from now to 2040. Okay, 3.25% per year in 25 years represent doubling, more than doubling the GDP. And you should remember in the Kaya equation, if I double the GDP, I double the amount of CO2. If I do not change, I double the CO2. The other one is the population. I discussed this with António, and of course there are numbers vary. Some people say that we are 3.3, 7.4, 7.6. I took the United Nations number, which says today we are 7.6 billion. This is not a big deal. It can be 7.4 billion. But the thing is, everyone agrees that we will be, by 2040, 9.2 billion, which is a 10% increase. And by 2055, we will go above the 10 billion mark. It's a 32% growth. So if I combine these 2 factors in the Kaya identity, then, and if I do nothing, then by 2040, instead of 33 gigatons, I will be emitting 98 gigatons. This is 3 times more than today. This is a huge number. So you say, it can't be. I have to do something. So I say that there are only 2 factors over which we can work on, mainly. One is carbon intensity, is how many tons of CO2 I need to produce 1 megawatt hour. And the second one is the energy intensity. How many megawatts hour I need to produce 1 kilo euro of wealth. So these are the 2 other parameters in the Kaya identity that I can act upon, because I don't see anyone here proposing reducing the growth of the human population. Anyway, it's very difficult to influence that. And the growth is a big debate. But everyone wants to have growth for time being. I think people will realize soon that it's not a very reasonable concept, but this is another question. You have here, this is from BP, which is an oil company, and Kitty is right, even though today oil companies are aware of these issues of climate change. And BP has scenarios, because no one can say today what's going to happen tomorrow. But BP has a scenario which is, I would say, rather pessimistic, that says we go from the 33 to 36, 37. Actually, the Energy Information Agency, which is an American agency, which budget has been reduced by Mr. Trump, but they say that between 2015 and 2040, these will grow 16%. Which means 0.5% per year if you do compose this on a year by year, and which is a reduction we will see from what has been done up to now. But this trend is not what we need. The trend we need is something like this, which Kitty showed in the presentation. We need a drastic reduction. And I believe these are the two factors you can act upon, because in population and in growth for time being is very difficult to act. So I will come first to the carbon intensity, and Kitty said that, but I give some numbers for you to evaluate the difference. If I burn coal, then for every megawatt hour, I would need 0.354 tons of CO2 emitted in the atmosphere. If I do gas, it's 0.2. So it's 70% more if I do coal with gas. So I would say if we go and we could from day to night eliminate the use of coal or oil whenever we can do it, the emissions, I don't have this number here, but I can tell you the estimate is that the emissions go from 33 to 15 gigatons. It's the 1970 number. And the 1970 number is a magic number because the Earth can cope with some CO2 emissions. We can't go to zero because we need some CO2 in the atmosphere. Should not forget that. But 15 is a number that the Earth can cope with. And I show you here what is the current situation. It's not a nice picture. For example, we have here 5 major industrial and human activities. We have electricity generation, because you know electricity does not exist in the nature. It represents 37%, more than 1/3 of all the energy the world uses to produce wells, to give us the comfort we have. Well, today in the world, half of the electricity is generated by coal. This is no good, to be frank. And this raises another question. Now, some people, and we have mentioned electric cars, I think it's a good solution. But don't forget, if I have an electric car that uses electricity that was generated by coal, it's bad. It's very bad. I need to go here to non-fossil energy. It's actually 26. Hang on a minute. In non-fossil, there is nuclear energy as well, which is mainly the source of generation of electricity in France and in some other countries. There was in Japan, but it's less now. But again, these are very good from CO2 emissions. They have other problems, like how to recycle the byproducts. But coal is definitely a very bad news here. And here we need to act on that. And we can for electricity generation. The second one is industry. Industry represents 22% of the energy mix, and it uses coal for almost 50%. We can act on that, right? The third one is transportation, represents 1/5, 90%. We use mainly oil. And this is probably the major challenge, because I don't see today, personally, that we can have electric airplanes. It's very difficult. Or even for big ships. It's one of the major difficulties in transportation. In buildings, it's probably the good news today that 45% of the buildings use energy from non-fossil energy, where renewables are very good, and gas. And the other one is transformation, where oil is dominant. And this is, I would say, natural. We have all this plastics industry. Our life is invaded by plastics. I'm not discussing the interest or not of having plastic, but we need plastic for our life, and plastic comes from oil. So it's quite natural that the transformation industry, but it represents only 7%. So you see the two major areas where we can act for the carbon intensity, okay? And I dare to say, maybe I can shock some of you, that gas is certainly the best friend for the energy transition. I think that gas, if we replace coal and oil by gas, we will reduce significantly the emissions of CO2 in the atmosphere. So this is the trends that are expected in the world from today's position. You see that oil, this started in 65. Oil peaked almost at 50% worldwide in 75, and then and this is 2015. Oil will decrease in the mix. These are good news. The other good news, and Kitty insisted a lot on that, is that coal will decrease. Actually, I put here a small note on this increase of coal before 2015, and this was a very simple reason. The Americans did the shale gas revolution. The coal from the United States became very, very cheap. The Americans replaced coal by gas, okay? They reduced the emissions of CO2 thanks to that, and the coal was exported to other countries, particularly in Europe. So coal in the mix increased against, and you are right, by 95 everyone was already aware of the difficulties and the need to reduce the emissions of CO2, but coal is expected to decrease. Gas is expected to increase a little bit, and you are right, renewables go like this. And actually, this is the way to go. So the major difficulty, I feel, is that graphics over there. Although the proportion of coal in the mix will decrease, unfortunately, some predict that is going to be stable, the consumption. So it's good that it's not going up, but I think there should be an effort to reduce the volumes of coal consumed in the planet. Now, the second thing is energy intensity. This is how many megawatts hour I need of energy to produce wealth for our economies. Okay, the numbers vary a lot across the world. For example, you take some countries like Russia, India, or China, and this is also embedded in Kitty's presentation, is very high. And interesting enough, the European Union is not very bad. And actually, some engineers did some evaluation how much is the minimum we can expect in terms of energy intensity, and the number that comes out is around 1. It means we, the engineers, with the knowledge we have today, maybe we will have some revolutions in the future, but with what we know today, actually, Europe is not very bad. It's around 1 megawatt hour to produce 1 kilo euro of wealth. So, but these countries, and of course I don't have all the countries here, are not in good shape. And this is what I call sometimes the poor's dilemma, which is the poor's are those that have to make an effort on this energy intensity, because Europe somehow, in terms of energy intensity, I'm not talking about carbon intensity, has done their job. We are not in bad shape. Even the US is worse, is almost double as Europe, but is better than the average in the world, which is 2.3. And you will see here the trends for the CO2. You can have many companies that do that. Between 95 and 2015, we have a growth of 2% per annum of growth of CO2 emissions. Okay? Between 2015 and 2035, the growth is expected to be 0.5. As we said, we don't need a 0.5 growth. We need a decrease. So, but these are the current trends. And this is important because it will let us know where we should act in order to reduce. But I'm a little bit less optimistic than Kitty on that regard. I think we are not moving fast enough. I think we need to move a little bit faster. Although I mean, we go from 2% growth per year to 0.5. We are almost stable. We go from 33 to less than 40, 2040, but we should go below, okay? So I will conclude, sorry if I have gone away. I would say we need to reduce drastically the CO2 emissions to fulfill the Paris Agreement pledge. And the current trends that different institutes and researchers show, we are not going fast enough. We need to go faster than that. And of course, these uncertainties are related with the policies that the societies are ready to take. Kitty mentioned some of these in terms of carbon tax. I think a carbon tax is probably a good thing, but there's probably should be worldwide and not a country by country or European Union or on this own. And the thing is, we need to reduce the carbon intensity, so we need to go from coal and oil to renewable sources. We need to reduce energy intensity, and there are many actions that countries are taking into account. For example, in buildings, one of the things is to better isolation. I mean, I live here, or I come here to Portugal, and I'm always shocked that the buildings in Portugal are really very bad from an isolation point of view. And this is good for the local economy because you cannot delocalize this in China. The buildings are here, so the work has to be done here. So this is an example. And as I said, I think that gas is certainly the best friend because we can't go from carbon to zero carbon in one day, and so we have to use the fossil fuel that has less impact in the environment. So I think gas could help in this transition, and we maybe will discuss other things. And of course, there are 3 pillars on this policy, and this is for the governments to act. One is the environment, the other is society, and the third is the economy. So these are the 3 major items that all the policy has to be articulated around these 3 axes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now I'll pass the word to António Costa e Silva for the discussion.
Okay. Good morning. I think we had 2 excellent presentations by Kitty and Victor. When we think about all the issues that we have ahead, the climatic threat is a real threat. I always remember the study by Professor Richard Muller, published in November 2011. He was skeptic about the climate change, and in the end, in the testimony that he gave to the Senate in the United States, he said, I changed my mind, global warming is real. And when we looked at the situation on the North Pole, in the last 30 years, 3 decades, we had a loss of more than 2 million square kilometers of ice, and ice is crucial for the stability of the climatic system in the Earth, because the ice reflects most of the solar energy, and this is crucial to stabilize the climate in our planet. So one of the key issues that I have in mind for this discussion is the following. We cannot negotiate with Mother Nature. We can negotiate with governments, we can negotiate with trade unions, we can negotiate with the troikas of this world. We cannot negotiate with Mother Nature. So the challenge is ahead of us, and as Kitty and Victor have shown very clear, there are interesting points that are changing in our planet. First of all, we have to look to the global situation of the planet, and both of them, they raise some issues. We are a planet with 7.4 billion people. We have a GDP around 65 trillion US dollars. We have a fleet, a world fleet, that all days cross the 5 continents of around 1 billion cars. And in 2040, we can go to 9 billion people, increase significantly the GDP, and the world fleet can double or even increase 3 times. In 1990, China had 1 million cars in this huge country. In 2012, they had 100 million cars. Never happened before in history. Just in 22 years, the world fleet of a big country increased 100 times. So all the discussions cannot be disconnected with the growth of population in the planet and the model, the economic model that we have. And I think we have to challenge this model. We are obsessed about the continuous and exponential economic growth. If we continue like that, we risk to destabilize even more the planet, because the oil, the gas, the coal consumption is tied to the economic growth, is tied to the model that is over there for more than 100 years. And this is very, very significant, because if we look to the consumption of oil, of gas, of coal, of energy, there is a connection directly with GDP growth. So, in my view, I think regardless all the changes that are happening in the energy system, we need also to tackle these issues. And for me today, we are at a crossroads, because we have still 1.1 billion people in our planet with scarce access to water, and water is a major issue. Maybe it's something that Kitty can comment. Our relationship with the resources is not a good relationship. We transform resources in garbage in a speed with no parallel in history. There is a very interesting study by US Geological Survey. They show in the last 60 years, in percentage terms, we are consuming today 618 times more oil, 1,000 times more gas, 756 times more nickel, 1,500 more bauxite. And all these elements are crucial for the industrial development, for the automotive industry, for the devices that regulate and govern our life. So, another issue that I think is very important in terms of our relationship with the resources is to introduce the notion of circular economy. For instance, in Europe, every year we create around 3 billion tons of waste. If we recycle this waste, the European Union dependence from strategic minerals can decline around 25%. It's a huge number. So we need a new paradigm, not only transform resources into garbage, but now transform garbage into resources. And this is a mental shift. And with that we come to the crucial point of the energy transition. And I remember some years ago, we are the human race, we are a very catastrophic race. We adore to say that we are running to a catastrophe. Some years ago, we had the ozone layer problem. And the media said all of us will be burned. And suddenly, the international community mobilized, and today, the ozone layer issue is controlled. Of course, the climatic threat is another scale, is a very important challenge that we have ahead of us, but as Kitty and Victor have shown, we have some significant changes in the system. We cannot ignore that we have 4 countries in the world, China, Japan, India, and the United States. These 4 countries, they are responsible for the consumption of 75% of coal. Coal is the dirtiest of the fossil fuels. If we reduce the consumption of the coal, we can control more or less the climatic change. And what happened in the last years with the shale revolution in the United States, they start replacing the coal power plants by gas power plants. In 2015, the United States consumed 13% less coal, and the CO2 emissions dropped 2.5. In 2016, it dropped 2.2. And guess what is happening? China is following this path. So China last year consumed 1.5% less coal. The emissions in China are under stabilization in spite of the huge consumption of coal that exists still today. And from these 4 countries, only India, as Kitty pointed out, is the exception. So if India joins the club, maybe we can have the stabilization of the CO2 emissions as it happened in 2015 and 2016. Last year they increased 2%. There is more consumption of coal by India, but I think in the end we can have a more stabilized picture. And this is one of the examples that is changing. I think, Kitty, you mentioned several of the tendencies, so the peak on the coal consumption that can happen maybe next year if India joins the club. But what is your comment about this relationship that we have with the resources? Because the key issue in the transition of the energy, as Victor has shown, is electricity. Together with transport, electricity represents 47% of the use of energy. And if we look to the figures, even today with the renewables and everything that you mentioned, the carbon intensity of the electric system that we have is around 400 kilos of carbon per megawatt hour. To stabilize the climatic system in the planet, we should come to 100 kilos per megawatt hour. It's a huge path ahead. So how do you see that we can achieve that?
Look, I really wish I had the answer in an authoritative way, right? Because I think we know what the problem is. We've analyzed it over and over and over again. We have the beginnings of the solutions, but I don't think we are there yet. I wanted to also come back a little bit about other resources than oil, gas, and talk about minerals and material use. If you think what's going to happen to this planet with 10 billion people, and 10 billion people, let's not forget, that all want, even pardon the words, but the damn comfortable lifestyles that you and I have. They want to fly to Thailand for a holiday, they want to buy new clothes, they want to have new leather shoes, they want to have the latest model of cars, they want a new computer, and they want more electrical appliances. They want everything you and I have. And isn't that a human right? Isn't that what we promise people? Well, all these materials that we use inordinate amounts of natural resources. We've just published a report that is called Tomorrow's Market. If we were to grow in a business as usual trajectory, and all people would live the comfortable lifestyles that we will, the economy will completely go broke. We simply cannot feed people the way we do it. We can't clothe people, we can't transport people, we can't build cities the way we used to. And so unless we see a transformation well beyond the energy system, which was the focus of the conversation, we will not be able to stabilize climate, but moreover, to bring prosperity to people, which is what we have promised with the SDGs. Take a simple resource as water, and I promise you this is the most underestimated natural scarcity that is coming at us. We are by now used to use our atmosphere as an open sewer. We just dump CO2. But what is not being seen is that water is becoming increasingly scarce. Fresh water is not changing. That quantity, we cannot change it unless we desalinize salt water. Already we have 1 billion people that have no access to water. But mind you, in 2025, and that is tomorrow, that's 7 years from now, water will grow so scarce that 2.4 billion people will live in what people call absolute water scarcity, which means that water is so scarce that it will undermine and reverse development progress we have brought to poor people in poor nations. This is particularly dominant in developing countries, but it is in no small part because of our consumption patterns. I wanted to add that everything I wear, everything you wear, the car that you drive was produced in China or in India. So what you buy and how you live has an impact on people's lives and livelihoods very far away.
Okay. Thank you. So, Victor, regarding this relationship with the resources and the access to the resources, we have still today in our world 1.5 billion people without access to electricity. And if we look to this big challenge, because as Kitty mentioned, people has a right to a good life, to some standards of life, and this will come. This is a huge, huge problem. And connected with that, there is the problem we didn't discuss yet of the cities. So the cities in our world represent only 2% of the surface. but more than 50% of people today live in cities. They consume 75% of the energy. They emit, the emissions are 85% in cities. So to face this problem, we really need a new model for the cities, with the electric cars, with a new mobility paradigm, but how far can we go? What are we achieving now? What are the main challenges?
Again, the questions are very simple. The answers, not so. I think that we discussed about moving, and I was coming this morning on the motorway from Cascais, and I saw all these cars, and every car is one single occupant, so it's very inefficient. But everyone, Kitty is right. Everyone wants to have a car and so on. I think we need to change completely the way we move in the cities. I'm not an expert in mobility, but I understand that you can't continue using even electric cars. I mean, we all like electric cars, and I do not have one, but I dream of having one, because it's for time being very expensive. But even electric cars have some externalities that we tend to forget. The first one I mentioned in my presentation: if you have electricity produced in your country using coal, using an electric car is ridiculous, because in fact you are using coal in your electric car. So electric cars are only justified if your electricity is 100% renewable. Otherwise, it's not possible. The second thing we tend to forget is that today, electric cars require lithium and cobalt. Lithium reserves in the world is estimated to 11 million tons. It's not very much. Apparently, Portugal is the country in Europe with more lithium reserves and can become the first producer in Europe. But cobalt is 7 million tons, half of which in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm not here an activist, but I recommend the audience to look at the way cobalt is produced in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's not far from slavery. So we can have a very good conscience. I have an electric car, I'm zero CO2 emissions, but maybe I'm causing slavery in another country. So we should not ignore these facts, okay? And in addition, lithium and cobalt are limited resources. So we can't base our development on two resources that are relatively scarce. And actually, there are some publications about the wars that are going on today about the rare lands, about in the world. There's just some dirty business going around in that. And also, one detail, but this is important, lithium cobalt batteries that we use in the cars today are not recyclable. We can't recycle them. So are we going to build a mountain of lithium cobalt batteries? So we should think about these problems, because we can't have a solution that in the end is not one, really. So to answer, and I think is the trend, the way we move in our cities has to change dramatically. Some people, for example, has studied the distance everyone travels between the home and the work. And for example, you have in a city I know relatively well, Paris, poor people living in the eastwards part of Paris, but working in the western part of Paris. So they travel dozens of kilometers per day to go from home to work. In addition to having a loss of time, is a loss of resources. Some go on train, but many go on their car. And I think we need to change the way we move around in the cities.
So, Kitty, there is here a very interesting issue related with maybe new energy business models, because we have now, this is a new wave of this digitalization, innovation technologies, and the autonomous cars. And the OCDE has made a very interesting study about Lisbon with autonomous cars, concepts like shared economy, which the young generations share very, very, very much, because most for the young generations, they would like to pay for the services, but not necessarily to pay to have an automobile or things like that. And the conclusion is amazing, because Lisbon could survive with less 80% of cars. So the new business models, which are very disruptive, can change completely the landscape of the cities and create a new path for the future. So how do you see that this will happen soon? It will take time. The public policies are there to make changes to happen.
Look, I think I'm hopeful and I'm very pessimistic. I'm hopeful because I see this type of change happening mostly in the developed economies, where millennials really want to make change happen. As you say, they do not want to own assets, they want to share assets. It's a totally radically different way of living your life. Even myself, my generation, I'm not used to that. I think that is happening. I think it may not go fast enough, but the biggest problem is that it is not representing enough of the GDP in the world. And if you ask millennials in India, in China, or in Africa, they think a different way from European millennials. They want a big car. What? They want 3 cars. They want to live in a big city. They want to have 3 apartments and go on holiday. So they have a different dream, but that is the majority of the people that will determine what tomorrow's economy will look like. And I wanted to add one thing on cities. I think we are underestimating the crucial importance of designing cities in a different way than we have done in the past. So our cities in Europe and across the world are designed around cars. That's the way we design cities. What that does, well, it costs you economically a lot of money, because look at how much money we're all losing in terms of congestion. That's not productive. Look at how much this contributes to air pollution. And then if you look at new cities and you look at the fact that by 2050 we will be 70% urban, particularly in China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, rapid growth in the urban sector. But if we do not design them in a different way by looking at material use, are these materials recyclable? Are they energy efficient? In other words, are they well insulated in public sector and the built environment more generally? Do we have sufficient focus on public transport? We will simply not be able to contain climate change, water scarcity, and societal upheaval caused by congestion, air pollution, and all of that if we do not design cities in a radically different way.
Thank you. Victor, a last question before going to the floor. We know that oil and gas, they are still dominant in the world energy because we can store oil and gas and consume when we want. We cannot not do that with electricity. So when you speak about renewables and renewables, they are increasing amazingly. China is investing every year $100 billion US dollars in renewables, more than the United States and all Europe combined, so renewables are coming. But renewables are intermittent sources. They will need, as you pointed out, the role of gas, and gas is the cleanest of the fossil fuels. We cannot have a technological society, a very developed society without backup in terms of the energy sources. But one thing can change all this landscape is if we are able to store electricity at the grid scale. And as we know, this can be the discovery of the 21st century. It is not there. We have micro batteries for some segments of the market, but in the day where electricity can be stored at a large scale, maybe larger segments of the world economy can be electrified. We are not there. when do you think that we will arrive there, and if the oil and gas companies could also play a role in this transformation?
To be honest, I don't think the oil companies are prepared to help on this, because you're right, companies say we are in the energy sector, but they have to change their business model. Some will probably do. I'm not, because they have capital, they have people, they have a way of industrializing things, so they do that. I think that that's the major issue in decarbonating completely, is how to store electricity. And that's the big challenge. There are many ideas. There are ideas about creating microgrids, for example, to generate electricity and consume very close by, because one point we did not mention is that when you transport electricity, you lose some of these electricities. Other things that, and I'm more, a little bit down to earth. For example, when you generate electricity with a gas, with thermal stations, be it coal or gas, the efficiency is very low. It's around 40%. I mean, you put one in input and you come out with 0.4. There are 0.6 that are completely wasted and generates CO2 emissions. So there are some recent, for example, cogeneration, where you use gas turbines in a combined cycle. You can go from 40% efficiency to 80%. So by doing that, you just reduce by half the amount of CO2 with the same quantity of megawatts hour you produce. The storage is the major issue, and this is why some people, I said, might be shocked when I say gas is the best friend, because you are right to mention the major drawback or major externality of renewables is the intermittence. I mean, wind is not blowing all the time, and the sun is not showing in the night. And we want to be able in our house to turn the button and to have our light to read or to do other things. So we need to compensate. While we wait for a solution in storage, I know that, for example, some electric companies like EDP, they built dams and they pump with windmills. They pump water from rivers with a significant amount of water to these dams, and then they produce energy, and actually the hydraulic energy is the cleanest you can have in the world, although most ecologists are against. But I think that's the major issue. I don't know how to solve it.
So we can, thank you very much, we can receive some questions from the floor. So please, there is someone with the microphones. The micro is coming.
Good day, sirs. I am Fernando Taborda. The sirs time I said that, no matter. Please, I go to put no one question or one question, but one thought. Do you think or believe that in it will can appear or discover one totally unknown planet energy that resolve, change all planet energy problems? Thank you very much.
Can you reframe the
I
question?
I think that it go appear in future one totally unknown in this moment energy planet, unknown to our days. And I ask source if you can or believe that it's possible.
The question is, it will appear a new unknown energy planet?
My question if you believe that is possible, that the man will discover one new energy source.
Energy source. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
As cobalt, as lithium,
okay.
or oil.
No, very good, very good.
Thank you,
we can
thank
have
you.
some more 2 or 3 questions, and our speakers will respond. Please.
It is a quick question. So it was very interesting indeed. Congratulations. But I assume you are from Holland or not? Your name, Kitty van der Heijden? Because there is something I would like to know, a great curiosity, just a quick question. Is there any comparison in Europe, just in Europe, between the countries with the territorial equilibrium and the countries without the territorial equilibrium, about economic efficiency and about energy, pollution, and so on and so on? Because if I look to the statistics in Europe, and I think things are never very well known, the most efficient countries of Europe are Germany, $300 billion surplus, Holland, $100 billion surplus, Switzerland, $70 billion surplus. The others are less efficient. If you look at the urban planning, in the case of Germany, there is Berlin, but there is no of the big firms is in Berlin. None of the national courts are in Berlin. The other cities, in your country, in Switzerland, the biggest city of Holland is 1/5 of Lisbon. The biggest city of Switzerland, Zurich, is 1/6 of Switzerland. And people in Portugal think, well, you should have Lisbon as big as Paris or London to compete all over the world. But I mean, how do you explain that in your country, in Switzerland, in Germany, without a big city like Lisbon, how can you compete all over the world? But this is a biased question, I assume. But the question, because you are great experts in these fields, about pollution, there is any research done. You mentioned that, well, Paris, Professor, so Victor Alcobia, people working inside of Paris go to the other side. Well, it is a loss of time and so on and so on. Is it not better to have something like in Holland or in Germany where people do not lose time going to work and coming back home? So this is something, of course, in Portugal, it will never be possible to have decentralization. So people living in forest will be 13%, and in 10 years' time will be nobody in the interior of the country. But I think it would be good, without hope for Portugal, to see what happens in Germany, in Holland, and Switzerland, and compare with the countries where we have the big cities. It is a biased question, I understand, but...
Okay. Thank you very much. One more question, and after we will close.
So my name is Rebecca Veloso. I'm a master's student in development and international cooperation at ZAG. And my research is focused in sustainable development implementation. And my question is, in your opinion, what are the main governance challenges for sustainable development goals implementations in developing countries?
Okay, thank you. So now our speakers will answer to these 3 questions. Kitty, please.
Let me see. I'm not sure that I can answer all the questions, I'll be very honest. Will we find a new energy source? I don't know. I think Victor may be better able, from an engineering perspective, to shed light on that. But I dream of it. We are, of course, working on it, for example, with what is it called in English? With fusion. But there are many different ways. But I am not sure that we have a model that is economically feasible, socially rational and just, and that we can actually finance. So I leave that one to Victor. Why, if I understood the question correctly, sir, and please apologize if I did not, why are countries like the Netherlands with relatively small cities so efficient? I think I would like, yes, I'm Dutch, though I don't represent the Netherlands here. Actually, the Netherlands is, and I hate to say this, but it's the dirty man of Europe. It is. If you look at renewable deployment, the Netherlands still has this aura of being very green, one of the front runners on environment. Well, in the past 15 years, they have deregulated so much and invested so little in renewables. They've actually opened up in the last 5 years 3 new coal-fired plants. That it is in the top 3 of worst performers in Europe when it comes to energy deployment that is safe and environmentally friendly. So I'm not sure that we have the right model. When it comes to cities, though, I would like to say, on average, in these smaller cities, there has been a much bigger focus on public transport and public transit, simply because they're very densely populated, and a much bigger emphasis on energy efficiency in the built environment. And for climate change, as Victor said, half of the solution will have to come from energy efficiency. What are the main governance challenges in SDG implementation across the world? It's very hard to answer that in a very generic way. Challenges are different from different Asian countries to Africa. I work in all 54 African countries. That's a world apart from Mali to Malawi. In general, what you can say, there is very little understanding how to do it. There is a huge lack of technical capabilities, particularly in the public sector, to make energy transition work, to build safe and sustainable cities, to look at, that's what we haven't discussed, food and land use systems that do not contribute to soil erosion and to deforestation. And there's a huge lack of financial resources available. We have promised in Cancun that we would make available as a world 100 billion US dollars for climate solutions. We are nowhere near as a global community to live up to our promise. So it is challenges there, but it is equally how, as the developed world, we are enabling or not enabling developing countries to provide for their future. So it is on all sides.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, as Kitty, I'm not the expert on all subjects, so I will start with the energy source. I would say that as far as I know, we have identified the sources that can be used to generate electricity in majority of the cases. For example, nuclear fusion. I know this might raise some eyebrows, but nuclear fusion has no nuclear waste like the current fission. So you can always it's a recyclable operation. But we are a little bit far away of nuclear fusion. But some say that if we don't need to always tap on the resources if we have nuclear fusion. Today, with the nuclear energy, we need these two things. We need to go to the nature and dig uranium and to build the centrals, and then we have this nuclear waste, which is a major externality of the nuclear industry, is the major drawback, although from a CO2 point of view is not a bad thing, is really very good. This is why, for example, the French is very proud because they have one of the lowest emissions because of most of their electricity is produced by nuclear energy. But this is maybe the only country in the world with such proportion of nuclear energy. But fission is bad for that reason. Fusion would be great, but this, I'm not a nuclear physicist, so I can't say whenever we can count on that. There are other sources, like hydrogen. For example, there is a big company in France called Air Liquide, and if you go to Paris, in downtown, they have their hydrogen cars. So they want to promote this because it's CO2 compatible source of energy. But there's some other drawbacks, and this is relatively expensive, but might be a source. And then we have things like geothermal energy. You know, maybe we have not explored as much as we could the available sources of geothermal energy. I know that in Azores there are some projects. The question is, are we explored all the resources to produce energy from this source? For example, if you look at statistics, this is for Portugal, we are not very good in terms of the amount of solar energy we can produce. We have enough sunshine in this country to if you compare with even Germany, which is a coal consumer for their energy, they have more per habitant. They have more solar power energy than Portugal has, and they have much less sunshine than Portugal. So I would say we need to optimize. We need to develop all these sources. So this is for the sources. For the size of cities, I don't think you need big cities to be competitive, and big cities create major problems. And when I mentioned the problem of displacement in big cities, it's all a question of economy as well. Poor people live in the east of Paris because it's cheaper to buy an apartment over there, and then you need public policies to go against economy. Lisbon prices, for example, for buildings are going up because there are many people now coming to Lisbon and living. So there is a need for intervention of the public, of the government to change things. As far as sustainable development, I would say that you need to look at, it's what I would recommend, you need to look the way you generate energy, and if these sources are non-renewable sources, then you need to move from these to renewable sources. Otherwise, you can't sustain the development. Okay?
Okay. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel, really challenging one. We'll have now just 20 minutes for our coffee break as we start 10 minutes later, but our guests will be there also to answer your questions if you want. So thank you everyone, and we'll meet at 11:30.